there are two very interesting convergences that are happening at this minute, and some of which we're aware of, some of which we're not aware of. I'd like to say that technology has like a double-edged sword in this circumstance. And I think we have a number of different convergences that are happening. One of which I work with is architecture and urban planning cities and the platform that is physical. And the other is a sort of environmental, economic platform which one may not see but has global implications. And both of which are systems, so the physical system or the economic system, and they have incredible amounts of impact locally and globally. The thing is that often we don't put a visual on them, we can't see them. Often when you're sitting having your cup of tea, as I would early in the morning, you're not thinking that the China has come from literally China, the tea has come probably from India. I like my masala chai. The milk has come from a local dairy in the UK. I'm sitting down, maybe even a coffee shop, and perhaps the coffee has come from Guatemala. So my morning drink is a global affair. And our lives are increasingly a global affair with global implications. So I'm going to address the idea of the urban development that is happening today and some of our biggest themes today that we see through the United Nations Habitat 3, the Agenda 2030, looking at the habitat sort of consequences, understanding like on a very deep level if there is an increase in population, what the impact on our resource consumption is going to be. There's masses of these reports that you can read on the actual data on how and what are the forecasts of the implications of this data and how we're going to use that. But the complex thing is that most people don't read those reports. And most probably from a lot of the academic publications that we have, probably 7 people on average read that, and 2 of which are probably your parents. So who's going to read it and who's going to apply it and all that thought that has gone into the complex data that has been mined to give you the information. How do we make decisions better? How do we create structures that are technologically in tune with the way that we feel about that data? Where do we stand with this technology? And that's what I mean about that double-edged sword. I wanted to talk to you about this sort of economic layer. I wanted to talk to you about that cities layer. And I also wanted to tap into a new technology called blockchain, and to sort of give you a sort of broad sweep of this 4.0 industrial revolution. As we've been much more aware that cities are attracting huge migrations of people from around the world, right? Certain cities are very attractive. If you take, say, Barcelona, if you take Buenos Aires, a huge number of people will come and gather there. There's sort of like the cultural identity of the locale. They also have this economic attraction that people want to come and become part of it. But as Michael Batty, Professor Michael Batty from the Center of Advanced Spatial Analysis will often say, it is the nodes that connect in a city. You would expect to sit in, say, a conference like this if you were living in the hills. But the fact that you're sitting next to somebody, perhaps that you don't know, right, doing something that you didn't know existed, increases the potential of what you could do yourself. So these urban environments are attractive for economic viability. But what's the cost of their development? And what's the reach of their global needs to survive for providing food and resources to you as you survive in that city? So cities are designed with a master plan, sometimes without one. You may have seen a lot of unplanned cities. You have a lot of planned cities. But what happens when the city and its citizens have got opportunities to do something with the data that they own, on them? They own that data, right? Whatever I use on my phone, I pay for my phone. Whatever I use on my phone, in theory, should be mine, but it's not. I don't own it. But who owns it? Who owns that data? And I think this is an open discussion, we can be honest with each other, with where that data is being used and what the options are for you going forward, not only as a citizen, but also as designing cities or looking at the evolution of the architecture technologically of those cities. Because if you look at cities today, they are effectively digital skeletons, right? there is an amazing map of the City of London, and the Oyster card is a card that we use for payments, but it's also a card that we use for transport. So as soon as you go onto the London Metro, you kind of tap in and you tap out. And it calculates the amount of distance that you traveled, so it will tell you exactly how much it should charge you. Right? Instead of like a standard fee, now we have a very specific solution for the amount that you should be charged. However, when you extract all of that data, you'll see these sort of like movements of people going all over London. You may have seen all of the flights, you know, and then all of a sudden there's another flight over there, and then you've got these incredible map of all the real-time information of the flights that are moving from one place to the other, and people all over London. And all of a sudden, you start to see how the city lives. You start to see the organism of the city. You start to see physical spaces in the city that become really attentive and attractive. You see the nodes in the city that are like the spots. They're the places that the city wants to protect, because that's exactly where there are so many more people that are coming through, say, London Bridge Station early morning. You'll be waiting outside for about half an hour to try and get the metro. So you can imagine cities are now getting to a point where they can't handle how many people are coming to them. They're out of capacity. Think of it being, I just don't have enough food to feed you all right now. Maybe I've just got a biscuit in my pocket. So how many people can the city feed? And what can the city do to provide that support on an ongoing basis? So cities, big issue. The design of cities, big issue. But what are we doing in these cities? You know, why do we go to cities in the first place? We look at these resources that we've got, let's say 220 billion, you know, this always surprises me, but 220 billion tons per annum that we take from the natural capital outside. That could be from the Amazon, that could be from mines, that could be from, you know, the landscape that surrounds a city. And we're eating into these resources. But every time we eat into these resources, it looks great. Why does it look great? It looks great because it looks great on GDP. Because as soon as you spend a penny, you got money in your pocket, you pay for something, it looks fantastic. Oh my God, cruise ship is doing really well. We're spending so much money. But what are we actually spending? And if you were to route that amount of money to something that you purchased, where it was made, and then how it was transported to you, you'll get to see the primary resources. The impact of which on the environment isn't normally calculated. You won't get to see the implications of your purchase. You're just going to buy something. And when you buy something, when you're done, you're probably going to throw it in the dustbin, correct? Right? Did you think that when you bought, you know, a sandwich outside, that you were going to carry the wrapper with you? You're most probably not going to. You see a dustbin outside, probably some recycling involved, and then you'll say, okay, I'll put it into here. But once this item has left your hand, it doesn't leave your responsibility. Your responsibility continues. And I think this is the big challenge that we have today, because we assume that once this has left our hand, that the responsibility ended, right? You think that because the system is designed like this. Cities are designed like this. Economies are designed like this. The whole of the system for waste management exists without us thinking about it. Why? If you were living in nature, let's say you were living in the Amazon, there wouldn't be any space for a dustbin bag because the mayor hasn't organized his system to come pick it up for you. So what are you going to do? You're going to have to live in nature in a way that is suitable for nature, in a way that is in harmony with it. And this is something that I call Replenish, replenishing planet Earth. It was actually born in Brazil. The idea, the concept was born in Brazil. And it came because I was questioning, if we sustain a status quo, think today, how many things did you buy? Anything. Like the clothes that you're wearing, perhaps it's like the food that you purchased today. Maybe you just needed to do a quick round and collect some cleaning material that you needed at home. How many things did you purchase today? And of all of those things, what was the global implication of that, right? If you were to sustain this quality of existence, for how long could the planet exist? No guilt here. I live on this planet as well, just as much as you do, and I have an impact on the planet, and I'm becoming more aware of the impact that I have on this planet. And it's surprising that as soon as I start to look at where does this come from, what's the impact of that, oh my God, you've got a plastic straw. You start to realize that there is a consequence for every action. And this is something that I learned with the Arawaco tribe in Sierra Nevada in Colombia. When the Mamo sat with us early morning and he said that, in my broken Spanish I learned, that there is a pagamiento, there's a payment. Everything that we take from planet Earth has a payment to planet Earth. And I thought, what do you mean, a payment to planet Earth? It's a ritual, he said. It says everything that we take has a very specific ritual for what we give back. And I thought that was so interesting, because we don't think about that. We just purchase something, what ritual? You purchase something, you don't have a consequence to nature. This is a fascinating relationship with nature that I started to understand. How are we connected to nature? Oh, I actually I don't know why, but I started thinking that I wasn't part of nature for some reason, this whole man-made identity. This building that looks as if it's like a man-made affair makes me feel as if I'm some sort of machine. I'm not. I'm nature too. And that relationship that I have with nature is important. Just like at the moment, we're all breathing together in this room, whether you like it or not. The breath that we have in this is a combined breath. The consequences of my out-breath and your in-breath are uniting us, whether we like it or not. It's air-conditioned space, it's thermal comfort, the air is being recycled, new air is coming in, and we're having a consequence on larger pieces of space and land. So the question, if we were to replenish planet Earth and to connect that with the sort of technologies that are coming out today, what are the real challenges that we have? And the reason that I bring this photograph up to you, the picture is an article that I wrote. It's called Replenish, the Convergence of Artificial Intelligence and Ecology. It's basically where ecology, or planet Earth, turns into an AI, and it's an article that you can read on Medium. And I had a lot of fun. I watched all of the Black Mirror episodes last year in April, and then I went through all of the Black Mirror episodes, and I was trying to get to the bottom of the consequences of all of this AI revolution. Everyone talks about this 4.0, and it's like, what is this 4.0? There are all these new technologies that have come out, and it's as if the technology itself is ready for the revolutions that we need. It's almost as if the technology itself is ready to meet and converge with the revolution that we need. What is the revolution that we need? Can someone tell me? I mean, we've got wicked problems. We have wicked problems. What are wicked problems? Wicked problems, are what require wicked solutions. So a wicked problem is one that is multi-generational. It's like poverty. It's like the favelas outside. They continue and continue. As the dimensions increase, the disciplines increase, right? The complexity of challenging that problem becomes a wicked solution, because now you have to meet a multi-dimensional problem with a multi-dimensional solution, right? So these technologies are very interesting in allowing us to connect with these wicked problems. And poverty is one such problem. If you go to India and you walk the streets in India, just like in Brazil, you'll go from a beautiful billion-dollar building all the way to a slum or a person sleeping on the street. So you've got what they call in Japanese a himpunosa, which is the distance that you have is so huge between the rich and the poor. But how do we create systems today to help people that otherwise don't have that help? So I think we're in a really opportune moment in our lives, and that is what we call this whole blockchain, smart contracts, smart methods of transferring ownership of something, smart ways of digitizing signatures and ownership of something. And what I find really fascinating about blockchain right now, and this is one of these 4.0 type technologies that was written about in the Fourth Industrial Revolution book by Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum. What's really interesting about this is this democratization of ownership democratization of technology, democratization and the sharing of this information. I'm not going to go into too much detail on blockchain, but I'm just going to show you just how much money over the last, I would say, 5 years has actually been spent over the course of these 5 years. You'll see the sort of the investments flow into this blockchain technology. That's in millions. So it's almost reaching about 250 million in influence, if you were to call money an influence. So this next generation of the internet that we call this blockchain can have a huge impact on cities. Because all of a sudden, all of the data that we have can actually be created on a platform. You will have heard of all of the data that is collected from sensors, all of the data that is being collected from your phones, your emails, everything about you online. So imagine if you have no intermediary. So this is the institution in the center that takes transaction and transaction from you. So basically it has two transactions from you and also me. But what happens is that in a very strange sort of situation, the blockchain sort of does away with this intermediary by creating a platform that becomes manageable on its own. So therefore, it doesn't really need any humans to be involved. And as a result of that, the blockchain has also allowed for cryptocurrencies, which are not owned by nation states. It's a real big, interesting situation to be in, where all of a sudden, none of these currencies are actually owned and run through the national governments of the world. So who owns and runs the blockchain? Well, we do. We own and run the blockchain, we as a collective of individuals. But then individually, we're not really an individual in the grand scheme of things, but as an individual computer node, let's say, that everybody in this room is part of the blockchain, whether you know it or not. So this zettabytes of data that we collect on you, you know, like everything, every time you use the internet, every time you use the email, every time you send a like on Facebook. I mean, do you remember the last 1,000 likes on your Facebook account? Do you? I don't. But that does. Do you remember the last amount that you spent on your card? That does. And the way that it does it is creates an anti-fraudulent system. So there's a really interesting fact that I came across recently, and that was $30 trillion in the last 15 years. This is by the Huffington Post. $30 trillion by the Huffington Post has gone in the last 15 years in fraud, just like disappeared. Where did it go? Do you know? $30 trillion. If you were to take a $1 note with another $1 note back to back, let's say from here all the way, you can go to the sun and come back on return 15 times with 50 million miles to spare. That's how much money has been somehow fraud. The big question. So what does something like the use of a decentralized system really give us? And what can our information that we put continuously, moment after moment, on this digital system that we don't actually leave somewhere? Somehow there is an imprint of you in some data center somewhere in the world. This is like an asset, like a collateral. And it's like something that we need to protect. That's why we spend so much money on the security, the physical security. Imagine the size of the data center for Google. Just imagine it for a second. Don't you think it would be the size of a city? Imagine the amount of information that is uploaded on Google every single day for maybe the last 15 years. It would create cities of data centers. And these are permanent locations because in some way or other, they are going to be linked. What's fascinating for me is these brain-machine interfaces. You may have heard of these. These brain-machine interfaces is like using your brain and using these interfaces to access your brain. So imagine for a moment, this is kind of what the internet is, right? We put all of your brains and every knowledge that you have about Curitiba from your experience from day one to today online. And basically the same thing is what a brain-machine interface would do. Now there's technologies called Neuralink that go at the back of your head. This is a company that Elon Musk has invested in. And you would be able to download that data, But when you download that data, how much of that data would you want to protect? How much of privacy is important to you so that that information isn't available to other people? What information is and isn't private? And how much are you willing to decide that that information is kept private? And I think these are the discussions that we need to be having. Imagine if in 2010, right, or 2007, when the smartphone came out, you had the decision to make a conversation at home about how you use a smartphone, who uses a smartphone, and you have a full-on discussion with your family about smartphones. But this is before they came out. What would smartphone use be like if we had the opportunity to have the discussion beforehand? It'd be different. It would be different. You would have prevented or prepared. You would have trialed and tested. You would have created a platform for you to have a sort of an experimentation. And that experimentation would have allowed you to improve on that experimentation, right? Because now you've got a method, and that method can be tested, and it can be improved and evolved. So, very similar to that, and coming back to these brain-machine interfaces, if that technology comes online, how much of that data would you like to protect? And as an individual, perhaps in a city, how much of that information about you, whereabouts, your behavior, when you decide that you're going to turn the air conditioner on and off, which car you decided to take, how much of that information do you want to be shared? And what are you willing to do to not share that information? There was a really interesting case for both the Brexit and Trump's administration. There was a company called Cambridge Analytica that took the methods of a Cambridge researcher and enhanced it a bit. What do I mean by enhancing it a bit? Well, let's just say that Cambridge Analytica took the data, spun it across about 1,000 likes on your Facebook and various other social media, and were able to categorize you in all of your thoughts and opinions. And the way that they do that is with, say, 100 likes on your Facebook. I mean, we forget about what we liked and what we commented on, right? But imagine if all of that data is available to somebody to test and mine, which it was. That information was then used to decide who, what, which ad. Who, what, which ad. You were profiled. Let's say you were profiled. They would know exactly your sexual preferences, your gender, your political views, family members, pretty much everything, right? In 1,000 likes, they say, this company, Cambridge Analytica, is able to take your data, scrape it off the internet, and determine exactly who you are. And that, for me, is a very interesting situation to be in, because what it does is it provides you an opportunity to decide whether that information you want to make available or not. So this sort of digital permanence, we've got this digital trail wherever we are, is a really interesting time right now. Who owns that data is a very interesting question. How is that data used is another important question. And where is it that I have ownership over that? At the moment, if this was my house, right? If this is my house, and let's say this is, let's call you my digital avatar, okay? You are all my digital avatar right now. This is me. At the moment, I have access to about this much. Everything else, all of you, I have no access. But you're all of my data. I have no access to you. I don't own you at all. Somebody else does. So think that your digital persona is basically owned and your identity is owned by someone else. So who is it that operates that data? And the cities are a really good way of using that data to provide very good decision making. Imagine if all of your information was owned by you. So now, instead of you just completely not being owned by me at all, but now we can work together, we can decide through our privacy, through our relationship, how it is that we want that information to be used. So you have a say, and you can say what it is that you want to use that data for. So what would you use that data for? Now that, say, Facebook wouldn't be selling it to a third party, who would you like your data to be used by? Who would be making decisions on the information coming from your phone? And what kind of an analytical framework or a blockchain framework would be important for that? So here we are at this sort of opportunity to migrate this information to a system that is co-owned. We all own it. So now there isn't one person who could be corrupt, because we'd all have to be corrupt. It's all or nothing with the blockchain. Here is a very interesting sort of snapshot of about 24 hours of mining of the actual collaborative networks that come out of the blockchain. And this was very interesting that at the moment, even though it's only a very small percentage of people that use the blockchain and the mining and the bitcoins and cryptocurrencies, that even now we're thinking of how much energy we're going to use in the future to design systems that will allow for a blockchain function within the city environment. Banking, finance, remittances. So now all of a sudden, money comes out of my pocket straight into yours. There's no middle person. There's no bank involved. And you can imagine that if there's no bank involved, then you need to have a system that you trust. There needs to be a transparent transaction, and that's all provided. It's a bit glitchy at the moment, but I think there's some really good opportunities here. What about like food, agricultural business, Agritech in Australia, very interesting firm, uses the whole supply chain, puts it all onto blockchain and says, right, you want to know where this food comes from? Here. You'll be able to see exactly where that food was made, where it was transported, how it was weighed, how it was priced, who the farmer was, who the person was that purchased it, the shop that's selling it to you, if you wanted to know. Because you're the purchaser, you have a right to know that information. So open up all of the supply chains, and what you have is systems that are now trustworthy. There isn't a middle person trying to make a lot of money on the farmer, who then gets extremely poor in the process. Examples of blockchain, Latin America, cryptocurrency, an incredible one, 2013 started, BitInca. It's a platform that runs across a number of countries in Latin America. It offers Bitcoin trading in native currency, which I think is very important here. And it really allows for this sort of app like Inca Pay to come in and implement these sort of credit card transactions. You might have heard of Revolut. You might have heard of Monzo, great way to be able to pay across the board. Another interesting example is the Mercado Bitcoin. It's one of the largest ones in Latin America. Does a very similar sort of trading platform for Bitcoin, Litecoin. United Kingdom has got a very interesting one. So this is awesome. Can you imagine that £5 billion per year goes missing? The welfare system pays 166 billion, of which 5 billion goes missing somewhere. And there's information about where it goes missing. So it goes towards fraud, claimant error. Perhaps I thought I needed more, and actually I was wrong, and nobody followed up. But what's fascinating in this example is that it's almost like blockchain can be used as like a fraud mechanism, fraud control tool, so that you can actually stop people from actually taking more money than is required, because it's all on a system that is openly available with those transactions that have a history. Another one that's really interesting, and maybe something that we actually implement here in Brazil, is land titles. If a farmer comes up to you and says, this is my land, but if a corrupt mayor or a business person says, well, this is owned by my father, and this is the title for it, and it's on a computer. Do you think the farmer has any rights? In most cases, they don't. But by digitizing all of this information by land use and tenure, what you're doing is picking a whole layer of corruption out of the system. And it's really fascinating. It's happening in Ghana. It's happening in Sweden. India, very interesting. Again, Hyperledger. The idea of using these startups and opening up these supply chains, providing that backup, so that any company can go in and say, we want to use your system. We want to be open. We want our customers to know where the money comes from. So I've outlined a number of different examples across Latin America, India, Europe. I think I'd like to go through some very quick sort of opportunities. And they are, we're at a verge right now of a new business model. Because all of a sudden, now that we're thinking in terms of capital non-accumulation. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've completely decluttered my life. I don't need to have 20,000 books. I've got them all on Kindle, right? You know, I don't need to own anything physically. Not to say that there isn't a consequence physically somewhere in a data center, but the idea that we have these new economic models coming about, especially with this zero waste mentality, zero carbon sequestration mentality, where right at the start of your business, you can have the chance to ask one question: what is the impact that this will have on the environment? Do I agree with this or not? So business models are changing. Imagine the security of your information of the city. The security systems require these sort of like backup, encrypted software. Privacy, we talked about that a little bit earlier, but the opportunities that we have in deciding how much of our information is going to be shared, to whom and how, we get to decide that. And there are a number of companies that are doing that, even in Brazil. It's called the black box theorem. So your information is owned by them, and they negotiate the contracts on your behalf. That's with these digital identities. And what for corruption? Well, maybe in about 5 years' time, we won't have that kind of corruption. Perhaps it will be very, very different. This is the article that I mentioned. There's 2 parts to it. I'm interested in making this into a movie, actually, because I think it could have a huge implication on the way that we consider the ecology, and it can have a really interesting cultural slant, an artistic slant on having this conversation. Not to say that we're going to determine what comes out of the conversation, but that we have this conversation. And finally, the book, Replenish, A Philosophy of Living in Harmony with Nature, with one of the very special authors sitting in the audience, Ariadne over here, is available online. So you're welcome to purchase that. You'll find out more information about us on replenish.earth. And if I don't ask this next question, a friend of mine's going to kill me. He said, if you had a digital ear in every building in the city, what would you like that ear to hear and tell you about this building? So with that, I'm going to leave you. Thank you very much for your time. I don't know if we have time for questions. No one's nodding to me. Yes, we do. OK. Oh. Does anybody have a dying question? Do I see a hand? There's a microphone ready. Oh, we got one over there.
Hi, my name is Paulo.
Hi, Paulo.
You brought a lot of examples from Latin America, India, and so far, which is not usual when we talk about technology and innovation. And you've probably been around a lot. Do you think those countries, besides all the underdevelopment and the poor economy and corruption, they are seeing a light in this new technology world? Because in the end, you can, diminish, you can make it easier for them to grow faster and to end poverty and so on. So is there an opportunity moment for the poor as well?
Oh, absolutely. If you go to Mumbai, there was a project called The Hole in the Wall. And the idea was some university professors decided to put a computer inside the Dharavi slum in Mumbai. A slum. The kids have never seen a computer before. Within 2 weeks, they were sending emails. And nobody told them how to switch the computer on. Nobody told them how to send an email. Nobody even told them what Google was. And that was the experiment. So yes, I have a lot of hope. Anyone else? Wow, there's like 1,000 people in the room and no one's got a question? You have got to be joking. There has got to be like 1 million questions that came out of like cryptocurrencies, blockchain, cities, data. No? I'm just joking. Oh, we got a question at the back.
Hello, my name is Gustavo. I'm a computer engineer. And my question for you is about the accountability for all the data that is gathered from internet. With the advance of AI, IoT, who do you think that should be accountable for using our information? I know that right now is happening in Spain, a congress to discuss about the AI algorithms. When you develop a software, is the provider that should be responsible or the company who buys the solution to use the AI?
I think
how do you see the data that is used? Because as you said, you don't know how the data is used every day. The company knows much more about me than myself.
Exactly. But if you knew about it, what would you do? But what could you do, right? One thing is to know about it, and the second thing is to know the brevity of it. The fact that you know about it is great. We all know that our data is being used. But there is no back case. Do you know what I mean? There isn't like, oh, I'm buying a house, Mum. Can you provide some advice to me? She'll be like, oh, yeah, your dad and I bought a house like this. Your grandparents bought a house like this. There is like back data and experience. In this, we don't have any experience. It's not as if we can go back and say, Mum, what do you think about blockchain? In my case, my mom doesn't even know what blockchain is, but she probably does now. The idea of like this ownership of data is almost like a piece of resource from, let's take this leaf. Who owns a leaf? Who created that leaf? Ultimately, it's owned by nature, and this planet is owned by all of us. There isn't one person who owns more of it than the rest of us. It's not as if you can put a boundary up above this building and say, this part and this part of the air is mine, although that's what effectively we do with airspaces and ground spaces, right? But it's a fascinating turn of events. In that, if you're talking about accountability, who do we hold accountable for what kind of information being used on our behalf? I think, right? There are many things in life that we don't know full information about, right? For example, which university do you want to go to? No one's going to come to you and say, oh, you should go to the Curitiba Positiva University. If they do, brilliant, but then you haven't done your own research, right? So there's a lot of things in life whose accountability is your own. I think it's our own opportunity to know where our digital diet is. It's our own opportunity to know where our plastic diet is. Sorry. By plastic, I mean how much plastic do you want to be consuming and what's the impact on the environment that you're okay with? So if that data has a certain amount of use, then you should know about it. And you should be aware of it, because nobody else is going to come and tell you, knock on the door and say, hey, Gustavo, do you know that your data is being used over there? And that's probably not going to happen. Let's get real. So we have to be on charge. We have to be on top of it. We have to be aware of where that data is being used. Okay, whenever you accept the terms of an app, there's like 20,000 documents that you've got to read to get to the bottom. Most of us scroll to the bottom and say, agreed. But if we were to read that, what would we find? But it's all in the small print, right? It's that small print. It's really niggly and annoying. But that contract of a small print, any contract, you've got to read it. And if you don't read it, that's your problem. You signed the wrong line. What did you sign away? So accountability is yours. And second accountability is obviously those institutions that do protect us, like we were talking about, is government or academia in some way related to the ownership, or even the encouragement, of learning about these systems. So who's in charge of teaching us about this? And who's in charge of creating structures that we can all be appreciative of? There was a really interesting project. Sorry, I divert. There's a really interesting project in Iceland that when the credit crisis hit in Iceland, they decided, you know what? Time has come to change the system. So all of them got together and created this online constitution. I don't know if you know about this, but it's a fascinating project. They all came together and decided, this is how we're going to have it. This is our system. It was like this crowdocratic decision-making. It didn't work in the end, but the hope was there. The system was there. It wasn't met by leadership that could allow them to do that. And it's interesting because they're all outside, with billboards saying, how could you not allow us to take on something that's so important to us? So I think we're at this time where instead of having a wrestling match with your mayor, with your president, it's time to have a conversation with them and say, look, this is the way that this technology is going. And we all want to be part of it. So now's the time. Go ahead. Oh, we've got 2 questions. Oh, okay, hello.
Okay, hello, my name is Marco.
Hi, Marco.
We have a software company for the public sector. And we are seeing this explosion in innovation and business model all around the world. And it's changing many industries, and new business models are enabling new solutions to achieve millions of people, right? But especially in the public sector, the procurement laws haven't changed for around 30 years.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, right. So how do you see, do you have special cases or cases happening all around the world of procurement laws changing to benefit and to accommodate those new business models, those new companies. They have new ways to provide solutions, and the laws haven't caught up to it yet. Do you have any cases you want to share?
Look at autonomous cars, right? The autonomous car industry. There's all these autonomous cars out there waiting to be on the streets, but nobody can put them on the street because there's no law that allows an autonomous car to be on the street. What's the point of the technology? We spent millions on the technology, now we can't use it on the road. It's happening everywhere because the whole system needs some level of conversation. There's a dialogue that's waiting to be happening, right? It's like we've got all of this technology, but imagine with blockchain and with Bitcoin right now, there's no country in the world that officially has allowed that cryptocurrency to allow open transactions. And that's why the banks are getting involved. There was a system that's called the Open Banking System. It started in January the 13th this year with a number of banks. My brother was leading the architecture of it, and that's why I know about it. But it's a fascinating project where the banks are understanding, we're going to be out of business soon. We better get on top of this. Because if this goes out of our hands, that all of our banking is going to go out. So it's almost as if you're starving them because we're not going there anymore. It's like, we've got two shops and one brand becomes more exciting for us. And that's exactly what we should do. We should be accountable, aware, and make our decisions the way that we want to and search out those solutions. So when it comes to procurement, people have been taken to court. I mean, look at Uber and Airbnb. I'm not saying that they're perfect examples of the sharing economy. They're not. They own all of that data. They don't share that with you, right? You don't get as much benefit as Airbnb does. You don't share that. So it's an interesting one because right now we've got some solutions but not very good solutions. And I think this is where we get to innovate. Nobody's got one solution that fits everyone. It's like nobody's got one language that everyone understands. If we did, then perhaps we'd be in a different form of humanity. Maybe we'd be cyborgs when we can understand bits. Yes, I think we had a question at the front. And then we'll go over there. Yes, so you can be second. And we've got a lady at the front over here.
You said that once we throw something in the
What's your name?
dustbin, Michelle.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Hi, Michelle.
You said once we throw something in the dustbin, responsibility does not leave us.
Oh, it's my favorite topic.
Yeah. And then you said you have decluttered all of your books.
Mm-hmm.
Minimalism has been a trend for the last 2 years, I guess. And everybody has been talking about decluttering and throwing their things away and donating things. And I can't stop thinking, where are the people's belongings going? Yeah, so my question to you is, how should we think our belongings once we decide to declutter and once we decide to throw our things away and have like a minimalist or minimalish lifestyle? How should we start thinking this lifestyle? How should we think the residue and the waste and all
these right?
things?
Right, Michelle. So think of it as reincarnating what you own. So instead of thinking it as throwing it away, which you're actually adding to the problem, why did you buy it in the first place? You're actually reincarnating it. So yes, you are recycling it. Perhaps there's something that you can recycle like cardboard or whatever. But there's lots of things at home. I'm going to take, this is my home. This is my future home. I'm like, I want my future home to look like this ASAP. But it's going to take me time to get there, right? I've got all this stuff that I own. So many things. Like imagine like the old computer systems, right? The really old like Mac, it's like this big. And what am I going to do with all of them? Let's say my father's been collecting all of the old Macs. He's got a museum at home. And my business partner actually is someone like that. He owns all of the old Macs from the first one all the way up to now. And I look back and I think, you have a lot of stuff. He says, yeah, this way you can see the transition of the way the technology's improved. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But you've also got like 1,000 shelves from across the world. And then you've got 1,000 books from across the world. And by the time you've documented everything that you own, it's like a supermarket for someone, in a way. So how can you go from here and transition to your future home or your future needs and your future identity? Because this is what it is an identity shift. This was your identity. I want you to hold anything that you have in your hand, right? Your bag, whatever, your ring, your jewelry. Is this or is this not your identity? It is. You bought this at a time when that was your identity. Now your identity has changed. It's not its fault, right? Can I blame this? Can I blame it? Can I say that it's your fault? Can't. But what I can do is I can reincarnate it, and there are many things that we can reincarnate. Perhaps we can disassemble them. And a lot of technology can be disassembled. My father's an electrical engineer. So from the age of 3, I was holding motherboards and panels whilst he was soldering things. And it's fascinating because you can take all the resistors out. You can take all the panels, all the bits out. You can do different things with them, right? A lot of the LEDs can be reused, surprise, surprise. There's a lot that you can do that it's almost like disassembly. It's like the IKEA system. Disassemble that life, right? Don't throw it in the landfill site. And remember one thing, it's like a product. When America used to make the best products, maybe they still do, maybe. When America used to make the best products, what used to happen was the product used to get cycled. There was something called the product cycle. So all of a sudden, America used to make them, and then it was way cheaper to make it in Japan. Do you remember that time? Japanese quality improved the system. It took the product, took it apart, said, I think we can do a better job, made a better, more profound product. They had internet on their phones years before we did, right? So the technology has a product cycle. The technology and products and things that we own have another life. If we're not going to use them, somebody else is willing to. Imagine all the people in the favelas who are willing to use what you're not willing to use. So think of it in terms of the movement of products and services to the next economy that is still catching up with the consciousness that you have about where you want to go next, right? So somebody who isn't quite there with the same thought of recycling would probably benefit for another 5 years of use out of that product before they themselves realize that this is not where I should be. I need to be in a better place, and I need to recycle this, and then I need to move on. So then that product moves on again. And perhaps at one point, it gets decommissioned. Now, big questions about what that decommission process is. And again, with the whole sort of responsibility, I put it into the dustbin, but who owns the decommissioning of that item? I bought it, but you have the consequences of it. So it's an interesting discussion. Thanks for asking the question. Right, final question over there.
Hi, my name is Fabio.
Fabio.
Isso.
Hi, Fabio.
Yes. I have a question about the contract, the smart contracts. The actual system is by paper, and all cities, the big cities, has all the land, all the cars, all the things in the paper contracts. Has someone in the world solved this problem to put this in the blockchain without fear? Because I don't own that car, but I have access to the blockchain, and I take a photo and put there, I own that car. This is a problem that needs to be solved to this technology be possible. Has someone to solve this?
So you got two questions there, Fabio. The first question is, how secure is the system? And the second question is, when it comes to the sort of the smart contracting or the contracts or the digitization of those contracts, how does that occur?
No, the security of blockchain is unquestionable. But who puts that information there?
So normally it's a data miner, right? Somebody who mines that data, and let's just say it's like a format. And you have to put the information in identical to the way that it was before with the change. But the thing is, both parties have to accept it, right? So if you're selling me an item and I'm not the one who's buying it, that contract won't complete because you've sent it to me, but I haven't received it. The same way, that question needs to be answered in a much more secure platform. What kind of platforms, even for smart contracting, do we need to have that kind of encryption software? Because imagine governments of data, centralized data, is under attack by hackers somewhere across the world. You don't think that this information is also going to be, attractive to hack? Of course it is. And I think we have to involve multi-stakeholders in providing that sort of solution. So that's what I'm thinking about it at the moment. But I think that there are solutions. Imagine that time when I have a photograph on my Instagram. It's like way down there. But it's a picture of the transport system in India. I went to get my driving license, and I was horrified. I stood at the office, and there were piles of paper that the sides of the paper had been eaten away. And I looked at that, and I thought, that exists? I mean, who and how would you be able to find any information on that? And that's just like our systems about 20 years ago, right? All of the files. Now when you see like a huge filing cabinet, you wonder, wow, that's amazing that you've got such a large filing cabinet, because a lot of that now has been digitized somehow, right? Even if it's digitized and kept as a copy. I think we're out of time. That's why the flashy disco lights are on. Thank you all very much. I'm going to be outside if anybody's got any other further questions, but I'm really grateful that you stayed, and you can find me online at Tia Kansara. Thank you very much.